Place-specific. The selection of site may happen through instant attraction or curiosity. The place should be physically possible to access for the frequency you want to achieve. Commitment to a site-specific create a physical immersion and grounding. Places serve as the conditioning for all human and non-human entities and operate in interaction and extension of environment. If the ground is toxic, the toxins will affect and traverse to the entities residing. In this aspect, rocks and human are equal as substance reflection of the condition of place. The boulder has unique history of physical migration and subsurface experience. Getting to know and reactivate a relationship with geology carries the potential of transformation. Hopeful experimentation. I encourage you to maintain a hopeful approach when exploring planetary kinship. In my case, I decided on dressing up as mossy exterior, inspired by the way moss covers rocks and the shape of green microorganism interior boulder, to visually evoke a sense of symbiosis and increase an understanding as non-binary, to become a visual extension of landscape and to inspire playfulness. You may like to look at performance artists such as ecosexuals Annie Sprinkle and Beth Stevens, who engage with the earth as lover. Fueled with desire, they apply intent humor and sensual actions with Gaia to cope in a time of increasing apocalyptic awareness. Or you may like to look into historical incidents, such as the Voyager probe project, where official representatives sent a diamond into space to mediate a peaceful message to potential alien life. The interplay of sincerity and fun is a potent tool you need to experiment with to maintain authenticity and ethical balance. In the search for balance, you need to allow yourself to fail repeatedly. Immersing in deep time. The boulder lies tilted in the landscape, and as I'm lying on my back, my head, legs, and arms touch the rounded contours. My chest adapts to the concave shape of boulder and open towards the sky, and a sense of support appear. I allow myself to take naps and fall asleep. I spend 7 days and 7 nights with boulder. Durational investment is key to all kinds of friendship making. In this case, spending time allows a study on how the grazing cows and sheep rub themselves on boulder, repeating this action daily. The fat from the sheep wool darken and texture the boulder skin. Time allow variation for day and night to inform intimacy, and that's how immersion of time may occur. The boulders we see and touch today connect a distant past and ancient places. The boulder connect to the subsurface unexperienced by humans. This boulder has variably existed for 500 million years and may continue its transformation for 50 million years more, until becoming sand and sediment. If we include boulder metamorphosis, the timeline is perpetual. In chance, this boulder companion register my interaction, it will be sedimented as deep time. Boulder and me are additionally connected as molecular matter, as my human bones will eventually become sand, and Boulder becomes sand, and all is atom. Boulder is kin in a plethora of meaning. Repeat and ritualize. Through repetition, you may increase competence. Repetition will expose seasonal changes and emotional tempers, and the ability to challenge pre-learned perception expand in such conditioning. Aware repetition assists transition from the conscious to the subconscious and introduce ritual potential. By ritual, I refer to stylized actions of intention and aware composition. You may wish to study and learn from indigenous ontology. In this context, I will mention the book Mythical Landscapes, a collection of 1,000 mediated reports by humans that have experienced Siedit, geological power with emotional agency. Reports of mountains acting out anger or avenging human disrespect or being capable of forgiveness. Rocks restoring health and performing blessings. Boulders kin to humans and kin to each other by partnership. The potential learning from indigenous ontology and cosmology is an opportunity which has been avoided by a majority, specifically by capitalocentric interest and systems. Recognizing inherent emotional agency with ecology may provide interconnected identification and assist compassionate actions. Visionary listenery, attuning by embodiment. Enjoy a sensatory immersion by smelling, touching, and listening to geology. I encourage you to explore specifically how you smell or listen. If you attempt to listen to Boulder, I would recommend to listen beyond that of your ears and include your entire body, not just the surface of your skin, but your entire entity and container of existence. How to listen to a rock and boulder requires an open mind towards what the act of listening might entail. How to perform listenery might require the listener to explore how listener might be listened to by boulder simultaneously. Be open to the possibility of human-non-human interaction. Take time to register the embodied changes, such as shifts of emotions, temperature, and ideas. Embodied registration can release what we think we know and open a creative amplification of what we do not know. Immersion of listening might include imagination of ancient sounds, such as pre-archaeological thunder or ancient smells, and allowing this possibility of fluctuating sensation to permeate in presence. Allowing a dynamic geological process of sonification to be explored. Leaning, yielding, receiving and giving physical weight and support to boulder whilst you perform the art of listening are useful tools to achieve a state of visionary listenery. Imagine and recognizing kinship. To acquire boulder kinship, the perception of human body should be explored as indiscriminate concept, an extended possibility to befriend a plethora of powers and capacities, regardless of scale, activities, or appearance. Fur, feathers, human skin, cyborgs and corals, fungi and crystals are all atoms. Ecofeminists have been at the vanguard of multi-species interconnection theory. Stacey Ayamo refers to transcorporeality an ethic that attends to multi-species interrelating and preparing the human mind to propose something unanticipated. Donna Haraway encourages speculative fabulation and introduces terms such as oddkin or unexpected companionship to liberate the idea of kinship beyond biology, ancestry, and genealogy, suggesting new pairings with planetary contact zones such as Boulder and Me. Haraway creates the concept Terrapolis as niche and time-place for multi-species companions. Astrida Neymanis approaches water as analogy for a feminist and posthuman approach. These ideas are all encouraging a complex network of matter-energy, an exciting possibility for engaging with environmental justice through the recognition of intricate possibilities of bonding with nature, creating validation of ecodiversity by interconnected and activated agency. Combine soft and hard theory. It matters what ideology we explore possibilities with. I encourage the experimentation of hard theory interlinked with soft theory. As example, contemporary science may support multi-species kinship by evidencing how plants communicate by electrical signaling, or how soil microbes and mycelia detoxify their surrounding, how water have microscopic individual patterns responding to plants by relational infrastructure adoption, how microorganisms such as endolites inside boulders suck up the information of places, similar with how a human tear hosts individual data linked to experience. I personally delight in how these geoscientific discoveries may align to indigenous ontology. Which lens to experience place with determines whether Boulder is perceived exclusively as static, grey, passive, or simultaneously alive with capabilities and deep time memory. According to geoscience, the interior of a boulder include microorganisms that live inside of the pores between the mineral grains called endolith. Seen through a microscope, these green microbes resemble structures of cosmos. Endoliths are capable of bioremediation and may improve groundwater by converting harmful compounds. Endoliths thrive with no sunlight, which also raise new ideas on extraterritorial potentiality. These scientific discoveries may and should rejuvenate human validation of geology in a broad sense. Vocalize. Become a geophone. I do not refer to vocalization as limited to singing songs, although you might do that. I advocate for an experimental approach where you turn yourself into a geophone as an instrument for the boulder to be expressed. Experiment with simplicity, no words or stylized structures or narratives to keep a sounding history of your planetary friends and tribes entertained. Content may vary, as long as the sounding is performed with sincerity, which ethic aligns with devotional sound tradition. Sounding or vocalization of nature in various indigenous cultures has a diverse purpose, such as creating kinship, calming fears, and help to cope with hardship. Experimentation with sounding, shared with animals, wildlife, and planetary critters, help to reinstigate a sense of planetary resonance. And my aim with vocalized geophysics is to bridge anthropocene, or sounds created by humans, with soundscape ecology, exploring the variety of spatial scale and sonically interconnect with earth, sand, wind, and sounds of sunset. Create Sympoiesis. The practice of planetary kinship is most effective when being shared, as this expands multiple perspective and experience. Being present with the awareness that you're in continual multi-species companionship, you extend an understanding of the phrase never being alone. Donna Haraway introduced the idiom and concept sympoiesis, or making with. This is argued from the stance that nothing makes itself. Nothing is really autopoietic or self-organizing. That is the radical implication. Sympoiesis addresses a complex, responsive and situated system. It is the idea to be acted on and practiced in company with alternate companions. Sympoietic arrangements may be known as cells, organisms, ecological assemblies such as atoms, and Haraway stretches her imagination to include technology and algorithm, as these systems are all mediums which information pass through. This approach might inspire non-binary, queer, biodiverse, and generous ideas. I can relate to that, as I believe that microorganisms interior Boulder do not pay much attention to gender or polarized dualistic category. Sympoietic thinking and action hold the potency of being a positively radical tool for engaging visionary with our place in time. You are now looking at a three-dimensional drawing of the same boulder I have chosen to befriend, allowing the observation of boulder characteristic through technology. Perhaps this representation amplifies ideas of boulder as object, or perhaps you might explore the idea of boulder as an extraterrestrial entity capable of observation. According to dualistic and polarized theory, a subject is an observer and an object is a thing observed. Such dual and binary thinking may isolate boulder and deny its value beyond that of human imagination or interest, and deny the possibility of boulder as observer. If we restrict our understanding of observation to mean seeing with human eyes, we fail to acknowledge boulder as potentially equally observing. Perhaps boulder observes through alternate ways, such as energetic registration, interior microorganism sensatory, radioactive signals, or ways of interaction we have no current knowledge of. By limiting ourselves from the potential of unknowingly, we restrict ourselves from understanding geology as visionary. The theoretical ideology which makes it hard to relate to boulder as something more than object are ideas that depict nature as other. Historically, such ideas are established through Cartesian dualism, deeply rooted in Western theory and social and educational practice. The uncritical enactment of dualism and binary limitation are also linked to objectification, treating a person, animal, ecological system, or boulder as deprived of inherent value. Constitutive thinking of nature through limited dual preconception, prolonged de-evaluation, and the objectification of nature. As I attempt to challenge my own dualistic tendencies to become an ally and kin to geology, I find support in Merleau-Ponty's ideas presented in the book Phenomenology of Perception, theories that are equally referenced and aligned with the ecofeminist thinkers referenced before in Chapter 1. This framework will be presented shortly as discursive with philosopher Ingunaya Myhre Larsen. We will look at the possibilities for on-site Boulder and representation of Boulder to overcome object limitation. We will allow ourselves to be organically distracted, visit confusion, and exercise sympoietic imagination. Thank you, Ingunaya, for joining me. I wanted to talk a bit about Merleau-Ponty's ideas and the way of perceiving as a way to also approach the overall theme. And he's got really interesting ideas on embodiment as one. But we've also selected some themes that we thought could be a way to introduce that mindset. And I was wondering, one of them is flesh of the world. What does Ponty mean?
The flesh of the world is like a general notion, and it's supposed to describe how we're all embedded in the same web. So we're all part of the same web, and there's no subject and object that they can only be abstracted moments from this original kind of circle of being. And this being is more like an element. So it's not matter, nor is it mind. It's beyond that, and it's before we abstract. So it has already happened always. It's already something that happens just because you live.
And so in terms of the Boulder and me, how could we link that?
Yeah. So when you are together with the Boulder is part of a totality of a world that is kind of the world you're at there, but you're also embedded into that. So we tend to look at it as if I'm looking at the Boulder and its world and its surroundings from this vantage point, which is a subject. But Merleau-Ponty's point is that you're already embedded into the same kind of fabric as the Boulder and its surrounding. So there's a communion going on in the perception, which makes it hard to distinguish which is you and which is the rock, and there's a certain intertwining.
Exactly. So it's a blurring.
It's a blurring, and intertwining is a set of relations that is endless in a way.
And what does he mean with chiasm?
So chiasm is those moments of kind of crossing that you would share with, for instance, the Boulder. So there's moments of the Boulder and moments of you that are kind of the same. For instance, you have a material. You're both made of matter. And when you're perceiving the rock, the kind of shape of the rock and the color and everything, or the Boulder, is inside you. So it blurs the line between inside, outside, and also visible and invisible, because the chiasm, the optic chiasm in the eye makes the world visible, but it makes some parts invisible. So the chiasm is also a way of describing that visibility and invisibility are intertwined.
Exactly, because that's what it means with intertwining.
That's one example of intertwining. Another would be that when you perceive something actively, you can also sense yourself being seen. So there's recoiling back to you. And when you touch something, you can kind of touch how it would look. So that's also an intertwining. So his point is that this happens always already before we get knowledge about something and before we objectify and categorize the world.
And you've been on the site with me, visiting the Boulder, and at that time you also asked a question that made me kind of think differently and exercise my imagination about what that could be. What was that question?
So what I asked spontaneously was, what if the Boulder is not an object? What is it then?
exactly. What is the boulder if it's not an object? And I think, like, when I first came to the site, I did see it as an object, but then I spent 7 days and 7 nights with it and exercising this question as well. And then I come to consider the on-site boulder as an element more and an entity of deep time. And I was thinking, because we share the same molecular kind of structure, there's microorganisms inside the boulder, there's microorganisms inside me. We share that molecular structure somehow. And this, that's why I put this one here, because this one is actually showing the interior endolites, the microorganism inside the on-site boulder. So I also reverted my ideas of the boulder as something passive and static, as something that was alive, an aliveness. And through that I think that I'm now ready to say that I'm thinking of the boulder as kin. But then these thoughts are quite, they're abstract, and I'm quite biased because I've been on the site. So I thought, okay, I'd make a challenge to these ideas, and then I made an object, which is a downscaled version of the natural boulder. And I wanted to give that to you so we could explore that more. So this is something you can explore. If you can lean your hands so we can, maybe the listeners could see it more. So basically, I'll just explain a little bit about it. I mean, the on-site boulder is like the ratio of my body, but this is the ratio of a hand. So it's kind of downscaled with that ratio in mind. And it's gone through a whole process of being scanned and photoshopped and then printed and then casted in silicone and casted in bronze. And bronze is, the big partiality of bronze is copper. And copper is also found in the natural boulder. And so it has the potential of also being more than a representation, because it's copper, it's the same material. And copper will react to air. So if I place it on the site of the on-site boulder, it will get kind of this brown layer and it will oxidize and get green. And so it reacts to place, it reacts to time, it reacts to touch. So if you smell your hands,
yes,
yeah,
they smell copper.
They smell differently, exactly. And that's also what these, that brings that kind of possibility maybe to think of even this as something more.
So when it's
an object.
Yeah, when it's put forth in this way, now I know the history of it, but in the immediate perception, it makes me even more aware. So I'm even more aware what goes on in the perception. And that would Anne-Marte would really like that. And he thinks that art brings forth what is usually not visible to us. And that is how perception is constituted. But it's not the object that is constituted, it's also me. So it's the communion again, and communication. So I am, as I'm looking at this boulder, rock, what do you call it, sculpture?
Yeah. So I even try to not call it sculpture, because my mind then kind of fixates that it is an object.
Yeah.
And if I call it an entity or element, then for me at least my mind opens. So I even call it, like, I've been playing around with it and saying that it's a neo-geological entity.
Yes, and is those words also meant to kind of break down some of our thinking? Yeah,
exactly.
So Anne-Marte would really like that, because he wants to dig deeper. He wants to go to the layer of pre-reflected immediate perception. That means before we reflect on anything. There's not even maybe an I. You can't even say that it's me perceiving. It's just the immediate experience. And so I'm looking at a shape, but this shape is also constituting me as the viewer. It's actually influencing me. So who is the subject then?
Exactly.
And where is the consciousness? Because usually we think consciousness is situated in this entity. But in perception, the lines between this and my body is completely blurred. because it's exactly because I'm able to touch, and this is touchable, that we are intertwined, we're connected.
That also really much aligns with the posthuman and ecofeminists that I've referenced to earlier in the project, because they're talking about this interrelation with multi-species and also the multi-perspective of perception, how these things could align. And say, for example, Donna Haraway, she doesn't even exclude technology from being in that equation when she says that technology, computers, our minds, this shape, are all mediums where information is passing through. And since that is something that is inherent as a quality in all, there's that potential of thinking of it as a more blurred existence,
and perhaps even a little bit mysterious, because when Malapati describes how the painter is making the visible world visible to itself, it's like the landscape. He's thinking about Cézanne, Impressionism. He says that the visible landscape is borrowing the artist's body to make itself visible. So who is the viewer? It's as much the landscape as the painter. And where does that leave the subject or the eye? It seems like we're mere mediums at some stages of his writing. We're mere mediums or channels for information.
So it's also, it's the perception of it. But isn't it also, it's the action. It's like how we treat it. If I just place something and that it's distant from being touched, or exactly as you inform it.
Yeah.
Actually, if you.
Yeah, I heard there was something. There's something inside.
Yeah.
Something to be born.
Yeah. No, there's a little ring that's left from the casting process, and we wanted to leave it there by purpose, because then when you touch it, it activates, it vocalizes, and it's also this kind of idea of a bell that could function as a warning, but it can also function as a call to wake up. So it's also got this kind of inherent thing just to kind of push.
But is that a warning to be sensitive to something?
Or a warning of the development of seeing nature as object, possibly. But, that's that kind of thing about how we treat something. As the action is also kind of active in forming our perception. Yes. And there's another anecdote that I wanted to share, because there's an artist called Edgar Callel. He's an indigenous artist. He donated 7 rocks to the Tate Modern in England. And basically the art gallery, they are hosting it. They're not allowed to possess or own. They can only host. And members of the Catchapel tribe are coming there to put fruit on the rocks to preserve their ritual relationship with it. And that's not for like the public, that's a private view, so it's not for display. And it's going to be there for 13 years, because that's how long the artist would feel that it would take for the knowledge of the rocks to be embedded.
In that place?
As an experience. Exactly. And I think that's an interesting example also, because it places the rocks as something else. It's not just art, and it's not an altar, it's both. And it can exist in this kind of intertwining.
Yes. And it's in Malapati's earlier writing, he would say that existence is inherently ambiguous. And that goes for everything. Like what we call the self is not either one thing. It's a flowing ambiguity. And I think maybe from there intertwining develops. As he goes deeper into that, it's not personal or the subject's ambiguity, it's everything. So that would adhere to his theories, really, that kind of exhibition, or you don't even call it exhibition, perhaps.
No, exactly. And that's the whole beauty of it. Because it's negotiating, like, how do we perceive it? And that whole language of institution and presentation is altered because it's the insistence of these entities as something more than what we usually see in that context.
And then there is so then you can ask also, when this artist is doing this, he's making these rocks.
Or they're already existing, they're natural.
They're already
rocks.
existing, but he kind of gives them a space.
Yeah.
And then maybe the, not subject nature, but something like that of the rocks is also made possible.
Exactly.
Because when is something a subject or consciousness? Is it when it can speak?
And this is what, for example, a lot of indigenous culture is already kind of maintaining and challenging the Western ideas of object. Because that idea that rocks or mountains or natural elements already have a power. They have an inherent quality. And I think there's so much to learn from that way, to test that perception through that. But then, of course, that's also embedded in experience. It's not just an idea. It's a real experience. And then that turns into acknowledging that perception of something like that the Western world in majority still looks at and as objects.
So some phenomenologists calls that categorization that we do when we objectify the world and put it into categories and define what it is, like the God view.
Yeah.
They try to apply a view from above as if we could know it all. And then you neglect the interrelational character of everything. And it's more like a becoming, really. It's more like you and the boulder, when you were at that site, gave birth to each other.
Well, that's a far stretch thought for me.
But as the perceiver and what is perceived. So there was already an interrelation. And from there came your perception. Exactly. And then came your reflection. But science will take the reflective act and start from it and say, this is the deeper layer of reality. And then Municipality and other phenomenologists will say, no, that's an abstraction.
Exactly. And that's what I love about that angle, because it's not excluding, like, you don't have to have a religious, ideology attached to it. It can be free of that.
Yes.
It's more about, or isn't it more about, like, your existence and your interaction towards the world, the flesh of the world.
It is nothing religious about it, really. It's more about exploring the actual experience, which phenomenology is all about. And then maybe the different theoretical perspective emphasizes different aspects of that experience, but it's always starting with the experience. And that's why Municipality says that phenomenology is a perpetual beginning. You always begin anew. It's never finished. And as the world is also never finished. So your communication with the boulder or with this, that we don't call anything maybe, it's an excess of being. It doesn't stop.
I like that because, in terms of the perpetual, I mean, if you look at the boulder as the shape, the on-site boulder, or this as the shape that it is, it has a timeline that stops because it's being, eroded to sand. But if you think about the whole circle, the cycle of the boulder, the rock cycle, that will it's a perpetual situation, as it will transform into lava again, and then it will sediment, and it will cool, and then it will rise up as a shape, and that whole. So it's also kind of aligning to a perpetual situation, which I think there's a lot of inspiration to catch in terms of thinking about something. Not as something that has simply just been placed there, but has existed and will exist for a long time. But I think we actually need to round it.
That's a shame.
But we could continue. That I know.
But
I hope that people who are listening to this also would get inspired to find a conversation partner, to exercise imagination. Because I think, for me, if I just keep on with my own ideas, it's a very different situation to whether I'm exploring them with you. And so I would encourage people to do that, to find someone to discuss their own preconception about nature, geology, or just the object subject, where those lines are placed and where they can possibly be blurred.
Yes.
And then I think I would just encourage to go out there and test the befriending rocks, see where it takes you.
Yes.
And possibly engage with the future in a hopeful way through it.
Thank you so much for having me in this conversation.
Thank you. Yeah.